Back again, Mum, for the second part of Going Home, chapter 8, I think it was. I forgot we had this picture of the group without Grandaddy when they were in the States. I know that this had been in with the Verdiers or the Coles, one of which, I can't remember which one sent it. And I think it had been at Heysham for some time. So that's them. Right, I'm going to carry on with this. No more ado. So here we go. Remember, they've travelled across. Of course, you've just seen this, so why am I repeating that? So on arrival at the hotel, they found that the building in Lisbon was in the process of being converted from flats into a hotel. Oh dear. Workmen seemed to be everywhere, and the dining room was not yet operating full time, so that meals were difficult to obtain. The Fammies and the Boyds spent the afternoon walking in the park close at hand, the most attractive part of which for the children was the Stufa Fria, an enormous glass house where tall tropical trees, pools of water crossed by rustic bridges, and the soft sound of spraying water created a moist and warm illusion of an exotic world. We must go there if it's still there. When no dinner was available until a very late hour that evening, the Boyd and Fammy parties decided to tell Cook's man that they wanted to move to another hotel. He agreed to this, provided they kept to one where Cooks put up other travellers in their care. At last, very late and exhausted, the boys and Mummy got into bed. Trevor and Kenneth in one room, Rhoda and Mummy in another. Upstairs, the hotel looked like a building under construction, which indeed was almost what it was. In the early morning, there were sounds of hammering, and when Mummy went into the other room, Trevor and Kenneth announced that workmen had come in through their window very early and had walked straight through the room, which apparently served as a thoroughfare from outside. This, together with the fact that breakfast seemed to be unobtainable, was the last straw. So the party of 7 crossed the wide street in front of the hotel and boarded a tram to go in search of breakfast. Like all the other Lisbon trams, it was very clean. The courteous gentleman who spoke English explained the fare to be paid. And when told that the party wanted breakfast, told them that if they would get off with him and follow him, he would lead them to a good cafe where he himself was breakfasting. So it was that the family had its first continental breakfast on shore. Hot chocolate rolls, butter, and jam. The kind man took his seat at another table, and when the Boyd family party had finished and wanted to pay the bill, they found that he had already paid it and had gone out unthanked. Wow. They emerged into a wide and noisy square, full of trams, and many of these having inflated gas bags on the roof, containing a gas on which the engine ran. The peculiar, though not unpleasant smell which pervaded Lisbon may have come from the combination of this gas or from some kind of petrol substitute in use in Lisbon at the time. The party was directed to the Hotel Borges, not far away, where they knew that some of the Serpapinta passengers were lodged. There, when told that the Bermuda family were giving up their huge room to go elsewhere, the Boyds decided to take it for that one night, with promise of being able to move the following day into a suite of 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, and a bathroom. The Bermuda family warned them that the beds had been infested with what's coming? Bed bugs. Oh, horrors. But that the hotel manager had assured them that preventative measures would be taken. Lorraine and Caroline and Miss Fammy got a room too. Having said that, having some experience with pest control, I wonder how effective those measures were. Anyway, the day after the move to the Borges Hotel was Kenneth's 5th birthday, so Mummy had invited all the Serpapinta children to come for a birthday supper or high tea. Since it wasn't possible to arrange a special kind of meal, Trevor and Mummy decided to go out after lunch to look for a birthday cake. This was difficult indeed, because they had so little money. That morning, the man from Cook's in charge of all the Serpapinta passengers in transit to England had lined up all those in the Borges Hotel in the sitting room to receive their allowances for the week. This didn't allow for special meals or birthday cakes. Oh no. Rhoda and Kenneth were left at the hotel with strict instructions from Mummy on no account to leave the family suite. Since they couldn't be left for long, Trevor and Mummy set off at a dog trot, calling one bakery after another. This was quite an undertaking, the city being full of bakeries, all displaying delectable cakes, but not for those on Thomas Cook and Son's allowance. So, exhausted and discouraged, Trevor and Mummy bought 2 very small plain sponge cakes, just enough for each of the 11 children expected at the party to have a little piece, and just big enough for each cake to have 3 candles, thus including one to grow on. Not heard that before, but that sounds like a good idea. When Trevor and Mummy got back to the hotel, they saw no sign of Rodder and Kenneth. Having noticed an enticing sweet shop next door to the hotel, there were as many sweet shops as bakeries and all irresistible, they decided to look for the boys there. As they went out into the street, Rodder and Kenneth came in from their visit next door. They were right. Where they had actually bought some sweets with a few coppers they had. Of course, Mummy was cross, but she was also relieved, and the crosses descended on Rodder because he was the elder and because it was Kenneth's birthday. At 6 o'clock, 11 children sat down at a long dining room table, each one ordering boiled or scrambled eggs according to taste, or perhaps poached for Dudley, and each one enjoying a piece of birthday cake after Kenneth had blown out the candles. It was a party, and the guests brought presents for the birthday boy. Among the presents was one he liked particularly, a mouth organ. But when his brothers discovered that it was made in Germany, they wouldn't allow him to play it. Excuse me. So Mummy and Miss Fammy tried each day to arrange some interesting place to take the children. On the day after the birthday, it was to the Botanic Gardens, which were reached by tram. Lisbon trams were pleasant and clean, and what families saw of the city as they rode on them was very attractive indeed, and also very clean, with an abundance of flowers and numerous little friendly squares, often of odd shapes. Altogether a charming city, thought Mummy. On reaching the gardens, the party passed under an arched entrance, where Trevor ran up behind Kenneth, kicking him in the ground and exclaiming, "Oh, I thought it was Rodder." Since all 3 were wearing Montreal snowsuits, they might easily be mistaken from behind. Well, Trevor. For Mummy, this was the last straw in a series of annoyances that Trevor had been inflicting on Rodder over the past months. So now, without stopping to consider the implications of turning an 11-year-old loose in a strange city 3 days after his arrival, she said, "Go home at once, Trevor." So Trevor went back under the arch, while the rest of the party wandered through the gardens. Although these were reputed to be beautiful, Mummy remembered nothing about them except her own agony, wondering what had become of Trevor. When they got back to the hotel at lunchtime, there he was. On the afternoon of the same day, Fammy and the boy families had to report at the repatriation office, hoping to hear of an early flight to England. The office was jammed with people, old and young, all hoping for the same thing. The official to whom Miss Fammy and Mummy eventually spoke explained that many Britons, interned in Italy in 1939, were at the moment being repatriated via Lisbon, causing congestion and delay on all flights. Most flights, he said, were by seaplane, although some were by aeroplane. One old lady, greatly distressed at hearing about seaplanes, exclaimed, "How terrible it would be if it came down in the sea! Whatever would we do?" Groups of 3 or 4 we were warned, were a long way back in the queue for getting home, single persons and couples being easier to fit in. This was shown when Auntie Betty got a seat in a seaplane almost immediately. On the day she went home, Miss Fammy and Mummy took the children to the beach at Estoril for the day, bringing a picnic lunch provided by the hotel. They went in the little electric train, clean and efficient, that ran along the coast. From the beach they could see the hotel where Danny and Mummy had spent a holiday in 1934. Mummy was interested to notice that Trevor, Rodder and Kenneth, without a moment's delay, set to with their hands to build waterworks in the sand, having had extensive experience of doing this with Philip Coles at Heysham. Whereas Lorraine and Caroline, without buckets or spades, were at first at a loss as to what to do. Another day they spent on the beach at Cascais, a little further down along the coast at the end of the railway line. Here, on the sand, in the sun, it was so pleasant that they thought of moving out of the city to a hotel on this coast. They bought the beautiful big spiky shell, which they brought home, and which Mummy always kept in the sitting room. Later, the repatriation office sir told them that if they went so far out of the city, they might miss a sudden call to board a plane. In the event, this is exactly what would have happened. Sometimes on a rainy day, the Supperpinter children at the hotel board played shop in the Boyd sitting room, which had, as on the ship, become a rendezvous for them. Such happy play, sometimes noisy, was considered a nuisance by some of the other guests, in particular by the Germans. The manager, in the friendliest possible way, told Mummy that these guests were difficult clients for him, and that unless the noise was stopped, above all before breakfast, he would have to ask the boys to leave. Since this would have been a near disaster for the family, activity in the sitting room had to be curtailed. Fortunately, the complaints apparently ceased. Good. Part of the routine was the Monday morning visit from the Thomas Cook and Sons agent, who paid to the head of each family, as they lined up in the hotel parlour, the allowance for the coming week. This happened for the Boyds 3 times since they were in Lisbon, just under 3 weeks. It must not be thought that Thomas Cook was just being generous. Not at all. Daddy had paid them a lump sum, very large, to get his family from Philadelphia to England, and after they got home he received a small refund for what was left. Temptation had to be resisted to go on a spree of some kind on Monday. Thought had to be given to the 6 following days. A man in the hotel, about whom Mummy remembered nothing else, not even his name, decided that Miss Family and Mrs. Boyd ought to have at least one spree during their stay in Lisbon, and so invited them out on to a nightclub. I can't imagine Grandma in a nightclub, but anyway. Babysitting arrangements were made, and the 2 ladies were duly escorted in their best clothes to a restaurant, a dull and unattractive place full of people and noise, and of which Mummy remembers nothing except the dim lighting and the immense fatigue and sleepiness which overwhelmed her. Poor company indeed for the kind escort. Presumably there was a floor show of some kind, or just some dancing. So much for the spree. And since we mentioned the Germans and their difficulty with Grandma and family and the other parties, wasn't that the story we heard that Dad, Trevor, goose-stepped his way in front of German officers and things until they complained? I think that was part of a Dad's story. Back to this. Anyway, Miss Family and Mummy occasionally relieved each other, one of them taking charge of both lots of children, while the other had a shampoo or visited the repatriation office or attended to some other matter of no interest to the children. Miss Family remarked after one such occasion, when all the children had been out with her, that she had noticed Trevor repeatedly trying to push Rodder off the pavement. And wondered why he should do this. Mummy explained that it was just a little family matter that would be outgrown. So it was. One memorable day, when the Boyd family was well into its 3rd week in Lisbon and were all at lunch, the pleasant little man from the repatriation office came into the dining room, squatted on the floor beside Mummy, and asked if the Boyds could be ready to board a land plane for Bristol early next morning, 4 seats having been given up at the last moment by the Strachey family, one of whom was ill. Of course, the answer was yes. So he said they should, that very afternoon, dress exactly as they would be dressing for the journey and make their way to Cook's office, where they would be weighed and told what to do in the morning. Heavy winter clothes were uncomfortably hot, and Kenneth couldn't understand why he had to endure such discomfort. Back at the hotel, the Boyd and family parties said goodbye to one another. Mummy ordered a call to awaken the family at 4 o'clock next morning, with breakfast to arrive at past. Nobody minded getting up so early, because all were thrilled at the prospect of flying home at last. They had barely finished their hot chocolate and toast, it being too early for rolls, when a man from Cook's arrived with a barrow to take them and their suitcases to Cook's office. Only two cases now, since Mr. Mulholland had arranged for the 3rd one to go to Belfast by sea on a ship whose captain came from Isla Magee. This ship, they learned later, was sunk by the enemy, but captain and the crew were rescued. Sunk along with the drunk. Each boy, clutching his own little attaché case, contained toys, books, and 2 mandarin oranges, each for Daddy, went out into the pitch-black darkness of 5 a.m. The way to the office was down a steep footpath with some stone steps at intervals. On one of these steps, Kenneth's little case burst open, whereupon the oranges went bouncing down the steps. The whole party stopped to gather Kenneth's treasures and put them back, with admonitions to fasten the case properly this time. After waiting Cook's office until 6 or 6:30, the passengers were off to the airport by bus and on to the plane, which took off at about 7:30. They're off. The plane, which probably held about 30 passengers, was of course full, but the boys could recognise no others from the Serpapinta. It was a morning of dazzling clarity, with a smooth-looking sea below. Unfortunately, no members of the family could sit together. Trevor was far forward on the port side, Kenneth a few seats behind him, just across the aisle from Mummy, and Rhoda just behind her. The steward was a pleasant man and helpful. He told the boys that, although the plane was British, the crew were Dutch, who, having been in England when Germany invaded Holland, near the beginning of the war, had stayed in England to fly British planes. Mummy had a large paperback atlas with her, in which, on one of the maps, the steward marked the appropriate spot at which the plane was flying, while he was talking. He said the enemy had not, up to the present, interfered with these planes on the Lisbon flight. Alas! Shortly after the boys' return home, the Germans, thinking Churchill was on board, shot one down into the sea, where all on board were lost, including Leslie Howard, the actor. When lunch was served, Kenneth was feeling too sick to eat. He just lay back in his seat with his eyes shut. Sensible chap. Trevor and Rhoda managed to eat a little, while Mummy, though feeling queasy, enjoyed a good meal, believing eating to be the best treatment for sea or air sickness. After lunch, as they approached the English coast, when the plane was jumping about, the air sickness became critical. Mummy could see Trevor up in front, being sick into the paper bags provided, and Kenneth looking almost green, while poor Rhoda was being sick all over his best suit. Oh, gosh. Before having time to take the paper bags which the kind priest across the aisle was handing him. Mummy herself felt too sick to do anything to help her children, all her concentration being required to hold on to... Let's turn the page. Poor Grandma. The lunch recently consumed. Just at this time, glimpses of land began to appear immediately below, promising fascinating sights for the southwest coast of England. To prevent further forbidden views, the steward went quickly from porthole to porthole, pulling down the blinds. Mummy, now sufficiently recovered, turned to mopping Rhoda's unfortunate good suit. To achieve this, she emptied her pockets and handbag of all the sheets of toilet paper, dozens of them, bought the previous morning in Lisbon to supplement a reported serious deficiency of this article in Britain. And as I read this, I hear there's another run on loo rolls in the supermarkets. Wouldn't you know? A bedraggled but very happy family descended from the plane at Bristol at an RAF airport. To reach the building, they walked between rows of Air Force planes. Once inside, they were told that Mummy would have to go through lengthy immigration formalities, and that meanwhile the boys would be taken around the airport to see the sights, an excellent arrangement which proved to include biscuits and an orange drink for the boys. Mummy's interview with the immigration was indeed a long one. The officer insisted that the family would not be allowed to go on to Northern Ireland without getting a permit that could be obtained only in London. Typical. When Mummy said she wouldn't take the children to London because of the danger from V-bombs, the man asked if they couldn't be left in the care of someone outside London while she got the permit. Mummy said she could probably arrange this with Auntie Marjorie near Coventry, but that she still couldn't understand why the family required a permit just to go home. The patient man replied that this was wartime. As Mummy rose to leave, having decided to try and spend the night somewhere in Bristol and to telephone Auntie Marjorie, a telegram was handed to her. This was from Daddy, saying that he had booked rooms for the family at the Queen's Hotel in Bristol and that he would ring Mummy there at 8 o'clock that evening. The boys were thrilled to see it was from Daddy. Mummy felt an enormous load of responsibility dropping from her. So into a bus and away into Bristol went the boys, getting their first sight of bombed buildings on the way. At the Queen's Hotel, 2 beautiful, big, twin-bedded rooms with a bathroom had been provided, including many unexpected luxuries. Abundant hot water and toilet paper, snowy linen on the beds, and a maid coming in to turn them down and to draw the curtains. Rhoda and Kenneth had the first baths, drying themselves in luxurious bath sheets, the like of which they couldn't remember. They were so exhausted, having been on the move since 4 a.m., that they went straight to bed and to sleep. Rhoda's messy, smelly suit was stuffed into a paper carrier bag from Lisbon and carried by hand until the family got home, where it could be washed and sent to the cleaners. Trevor and Mummy went down to dinner after bathing. In the dining room there were more pleasant surprises. The tables, covered with clean white cloths and polished silver, looked so inviting. The mother's and son's appetites were whetted almost beyond bearing. In view of the shortage of meat, scrambled eggs were the main course, and this was Trevor's and Mummy's introduction to reconstituted dried eggs, which they found delicious. Better, in fact, than any dried eggs they subsequently ate. Daddy was served by pleasant waitresses in black dresses with white aprons, just as in pre-war days. Dad always liked his war food, I think. Spam was a particular favourite. After dinner, when Trevor had gone to bed, Mummy sat in a very crowded and smoky lounge, drinking a cup of tea and waiting for Daddy's telephone call. When a page boy came to summon her to the box, her legs went so weak that she could scarcely walk. There she heard Daddy's voice for the first time in 32 months. Can you imagine? He told her that he was in Belfast, about to board the Heysham boat, that he would travel by train next morning to Birmingham, where he would meet the family in the station when they arrived, on a certain train leaving Bristol quite soon after breakfast. In the morning, when they heard this, the boys' excitement was tremendous. Dressing quickly and eating an excellent breakfast were joyful things to do. Then, when the hotel porter had put the cases on a barrow, off they went on foot to the station not far away. On the train they had 2 seats facing each other, which was cosy, the boys all wearing their Montreal snowsuits over their other suits and their boots, this being the easiest way to carry them, looked a strange trio on this English train. But then English trains in those days must have provided many strange sights. At a station along the line, a crowd of soldiers boarded the train, and the boys willingly gave them their seats. It wasn't far now to Birmingham, and Mummy kept her seat. Caught up in a great rush of people, she was wondering how they would be able to find Daddy, when there he was, exactly in front of them, as they got off the train. Mummy had the first hug and kiss, then Trevor and Rhoda jumped up into his arms. But Kenneth, standing firm and looking up at this tall officer, asked, "Are you my daddy?" When the answer came, "Yes, Sonny, I'm your daddy," up he jumped into Daddy's arms, and all during the rest of the day would scarcely let him out of his sight. As the reunited family walked across the road to the hotel, Kenneth put his hand into Daddy's. He sat beside Daddy at lunch, and when later it was bedtime, insisted that Daddy attend him in his bath and tuck him into bed. During lunch, Daddy told the boys and Mummy that they were going to Auntie Marjorie and Uncle Bob near Coventry for the weekend. It was now Saturday, and on Monday night would cross to Belfast via Heysham. Mummy told him what the immigration officer in Bristol had said about the absolute impossibility of the family going to Northern Ireland without a permit. Daddy replied that this was nonsense, and just to leave it to him. So, after lunch, another train trip, just a short one to Coventry, and all into a taxi to take them to Beechwood House in its lovely garden. There they were welcomed by Aunt Marjorie and Uncle Bob, Anne being away at school, who made them feel that, if not quite home, they were almost there. After the physical constraint of free movement in Montreal, on the Serpa Pinto and in Lisbon, the boys ran immediately into the garden, which they explored until Auntie Marjorie called them in to supper. And what a special supper it was! Some cold meat and salads with tiny leaves of very early lettuce from the greenhouse, and a tin of pears, bought with precious points from Aunt Marjorie's ration book. And the boys' bedroom sweet. The large spare room with twin beds, and across the foot of these an officer's camp bed for Kenneth. A beautiful big bathroom opened off the bedroom. As Mummy went to bed, she knew that this had been and would forever be the happiest day of her life. Sunday was, for the boys, one more chapter in the great adventure. For Daddy and Mummy, a day of so much calm, leisure and contentment that it seemed more dream than reality. Their gratitude to Auntie Marjorie and Uncle Bob for providing this haven was profound. On Monday morning, the Boyd family was on the road again. First, a short train journey to Nuneaton Junction, where there was time for lunch in the station restaurant, clean and well served, before taking the train to Heysham. At Heysham, there had to be a wait of several hours before the Belfast boat would sail, quite late at night. So Daddy told the taxi driver at Heysham station to drive to a quiet cafe where the party could get a light meal while waiting, and then to return to pick them up in time to board the ship. This he did. But the wait proved tedious, especially for sleepy little boys. Mummy had bought the Bambi book in her handbag for reading out loud. This was a help. At long last, the taxi returned, and before they knew it, the family were at the foot of the gangway on the last lap of the long homeward trail. Mummy, remembering the immigration officer in Bristol, was sure there would be a last-minute prohibition from boarding, but Daddy told her not to say a word and just to follow him. He went up the gangway first, showing his army pass to the official and saying, "This is my family." Not another word was spoken, and the boys and Mummy followed them into the ship. In no time, Trevor, Rodder, and Kenneth were tucked up in their bunks. Trevor in one cabin, Rodder and Kenneth in another. And when they wakened, they'd be in Belfast. They were, however, careful to follow the lifeboat drill as on the Serpapinto. When morning came and they went on deck, they were sailing along in Belfast Lough. Soon the ship was tied up at the dock, and soon after that they were all in a taxi, driving over the Queen's Bridge towards Hollywood. Since that was the direction they took, they saw little, if any, bomb damage. The nearer they got to Skibbereen, the more familiar each landmark became. Hollywood with the Maypole, the Bangor Road with the Warren up on the right, where Rodder had gone to school, then Marino, and soon the watering trough painted red at Cultraw, with the barberry hedge drooping over the wall on the left, where the Cultraw station road turned off to Skibbereen. And in minutes they were turning into the driveway. There was the house, tall and white, with the big eucalyptus tree at the edge of the drive, and the early rhododendron in crimson bloom at the bottom of the front lawn. Out of the taxi and through the familiar door into the hall. There were Mama and Auntie with open arms. It couldn't be true. It was a dream that had been dreamed so often. But no, it didn't vanish. It stayed, and it was real. The family, 6 weeks after leaving Montreal, were home. Now the other grandmother, Croak, whom they had left, standing on the dock in Philadelphia, would have to be sent a cable telling her that they were home. And the notes that Grandma wrote for this, the first one was, because of Mummy's long-standing distrust of the hygiene practiced in countries like Portugal, she decided that all members of the family would be inoculated against typhoid fever. And this was done one afternoon when the family travelled across the city by tram to Dr. Rubin's surgery. Before supper that evening, Kenneth complained of not feeling well and went to bed. Halfway through supper, Rodder went to bed, and after supper it was Trevor's turn. Mummy was last to succumb, and all had temperatures. Next morning, all were well again. Poor things. Number 2, there were still some Yugoslav coat hangers in the wardrobes. Good. Number 3, it was only the jacket of the snowsuits that they were wearing, and these had pointed hoods. The presence of Germans in the hotel, especially in the dining room, were a continuous source of worry to Mummy, and who had to forbid the boys to make rude remarks about them, which might easily have caused trouble. Oh, so that was the goose-stepping bit, yeah. And number 5, this was Aunt Marjorie McKeown, Daddy's sister, and not to be confused with Auntie Marjorie Wittig in Philadelphia, who was Daddy's niece and Aunt Lillian's daughter. Thank you for those notes, Grandma. And that's that, at the end of that long chapter. Good. Right. I need a drink of water after all that. Speak soon then, Mum.